Maybe you're new to production music or, maybe you've been at this for years, but either way, I'd imagine at some point you've probably asked yourself, do I have what it takes? I mean, I have, and I'd be surprised if even the most top composers in the field hadn't looked themselves in the mirror, neck deep in obligations and deadlines, and pondered, can I really do this? Now, I'm not talking about imposter syndrome, which is a whole other thing I've talked about before. It's more like taking a sobering look at whether or not you really have it in you to have a career as a composer. So on today's show, I thought I'd share with you what I think it takes to be successful in the production music industry, with the understanding that most, if not all of these, I'm still working on in myself. Plus, we're going to listen through the latest submission in my year of taxi, follow up on any returns or forwards, and I provide feedback on a cue written by a member of the 52 Cues community on this week's episode of the 52 Cues podcast. What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Croft, and welcome back to another episode of the 52 Cues podcast, a weekly podcast dedicated to all things production and library music, where we talk about industry topics and take deep dives into the different aspects of being a working production music composer. Plus, in my Year of Taxi update, we're going to check in on any returns or forwards and take a listen to this week's submission, which is a mellow, lo-fi chill hop instrumental. And then a little bit later, I'm going to give my thoughts on a dark, mysterious cue written by 52 Cues community member Claudio D, so you definitely want to stick around for all of that. If this is your first time here, welcome. I know you have a ton of options out there, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio podcast on the go. I just want to thank you for spending part of your day here with me. I also want to give a special word of thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52 Cues who help keep the podcast, the channel, and everything we do here going. We are 100% community supported, so you're not going to hear any ads for mattresses or meal plans, so you can thank them. But, if you want to learn more about how you can help support 52 Cues and also unlock extra perks like live streams, workshops, Zoom feedback sessions, and a ton more, be sure to click on the links in the description or stick around, because we're going to be talking more about that a little bit later in today's episode. So let's check in on my year of taxi, and I'm happy to report that I've heard back from Screener 368, hey Screener 368, that both of the contemporary hip-hop cues have been forwarded. They've both been forwarded. So Game Time Decision and UK Drill Sergeant have been forwarded, and we're gonna listen to Game Time Decision. Let's get that kind of back in our ears as we are listening through the feedback. And what the screener said was what I like most about this song. Game Time Decision definitely has a catchy melodic motif that would certainly inspire a top line. The beat is solid, and overall, I enjoyed this. What could be improved? I think perhaps the mix could be tailored so the drums hit a little harder, but was otherwise on point, Dave. Appreciate that. And I like it when the screeners use your names. I think that's a little personal touch. And I forwarded this song because this is getting the opportunity to be heard because it's well crafted and definitely along the lines of the references. And I like the way the screener put this. It's getting the opportunity to be heard. So even if there are some things that can be improved, which I don't necessarily disagree. Yeah, I think the kick could absolutely could pop a little bit more for sure. But I like the idea of the opportunity to be heard. It's not a deal breaker. And so that was a Game Time Decision. And then the next cue was UK Drill Sergeant. Feedback for this was what I liked most about the song. UK Drill Sergeant is another solid effort, and I appreciate the consistency and the quality of your work. Thank you, 368. I think the song could be improved by This song, this has a bit more of a cue feel to it, and I think that's probably where you can make a few adjustments. I try to make sure it sounds like something you'd hear on Spotify, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and not as much like a score. This is an interesting note. And I'm unpacking what the screener means, and I think it's probably the strings and the pizzicato. So it's probably the string work that makes it feel. As far as the form, this is another example where I leaned into commercially released hip hop form. To that point, I brought in a commercial record, a commercially released track, and used the starts and stops, and when it went into the loop, and when it went or into the hook, and when it pulled back from the hook. I used that as a structural overlay, a little bit of modeling technique there, but I imagine some of that is the strings, even though the pizzicato strings I actually got from listening through a bunch of drill cues, and so that was the inspiration, along with the little choir part and all of that. But regardless, I appreciate the note. They said, I'm forwarding this, so while the vibe isn't as authentic as the references, I still think this deserves to be heard. And there's that again. It deserves to be heard. So 368, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you, and thanks for the good notes, and gives me something to kind of work towards, and especially that game time decision note as far as having the drums pop out a little bit, definitely working towards that. So this week I am submitting for a mellow lo-fi chill hop instrumental cue. And I haven't done lo-fi since it was called acid jazz and trip hop way back in the early 2000s. And I know it's not exactly the same, but using these kind of chill jazzy chords and stuff was really what I was doing a decade ago or longer. Wow, 15 years ago with FL Studio, back when it was still called Fruity Loops, and Acid Pro, and doing loop collages essentially. So they're looking for relaxing instrumental cues that could be heard on this playlist. And what's interesting about these references is these are songs, these are tracks, especially Low Tension by John PM here. Shannon and I, Mrs. 52 Qs, we often listen to lo-fi when we're winding down. And so there's a playlist called, I believe, Lo-Fi for Sleep. And that cue is on there. And so I borrowed a lot of inspiration from an actual Spotify playlist. So the brief goes on to read, please send them well-produced lo-fi chill hop instrumental cues with an overall relaxing, tranquil, and mellow vibe and feel. Soothing melodies, laid-back beats, peaceful arrangements, and solid instrumentation in the ballpark of the references. Make sure that your virtual sounds sound good and not dated sounding. If you have tracks that could soothe someone while they unwind from the day, then send them in. And so they're looking for 90 seconds to 2 minutes. And so the track that I wrote is called The Fan Helps Me Sleep, and which is such a lo-fi type title, right? It breaks one of my own little rules, of titling, which is don't put a definite article in front of it, but it is what it is, right? So one of the things I really like about writing lo-fi and listening to lo-fi is lots of sound design elements and lots of Foley or diegetic sounds, where it sounds like a cityscape or somebody walking, or sounds like a car running, or regardless. In this playlist, especially Lo-Fi for Sleep, I thought to myself, what sound is super soothing to me and helps me sleep? And that is the sound of a fan. More particularly an oscillating or a rotating fan. And so I should have recorded my own, but I went in and found a fan sound effect of an oscillating fan just kind of turning side to side across the stereo field. And that is cooking underneath this whole thing, along with, vinyl sound effects and all of that. So here is The Fan Helps Me Sleep. that was The Fan Helps Me Sleep, which is autobiographical, and we'll see how it goes. If I were to get a return, I would imagine it was probably over that saxophone. The saxophone might. It's tough because lo-fi, believe it or not, it's pretty broad as far as, the vibe and everything. And so the saxophone might be a little too, I don't want to say aggressive, but it might be a little too out in front. And so as far as being on like a sleepy time, tranquil playlist, but I tried to find like a tenor sax that was really super mellow and balancing it being a feature versus just being kind of background texture. And if you want to see a full breakdown of this cue, including going kind of sound by sound and how this was all put together, then I have a cue breakdown that's available for the friends and family subscribers over at 52 Cues. So why don't you join us? But that is my Year of Taxi check-in. So today's topic: do you have what it takes? Do you have what it takes to be a working professional composer? And I would be surprised if you haven't at some point asked yourself these things. Do I have what it takes? Do I really want this? Do I really have what it takes to do this? I'd be surprised if you haven't. I know I do. I asked myself just this week. And so before we launch into anything, just know that I am on this path alongside you, right? If anything, I'm just a future version of you, but we're on the same path. So I'm still working on these, haven't got it all figured out. But I wanted to unpack, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 takes to being a working production music composer. 8 takes. And then I'll talk about each one. So number 1, and this is baseline, right? This is everybody. You have to be, and it takes being a good composer. That's first and foremost. You have to be a good composer. You have to know your way around the DAW. You have to know what libraries are looking for. You have to write good music, mixed well. It's got to be, things are quantized and making sense, responding to the brief, all of those things. That's actually baseline. And I have an upcoming moto vlog, actually, where I talk about how being good isn't quite good enough. But that's, if you want to watch me pontificate on that on a motorcycle, then you can check that out coming up in a few weeks. But the first thing it takes is being a good composer. Notice I didn't say being a great composer, but being a good composer. Because of these 8 takes, the composing, while number 1, I don't think is necessarily any more important than everything else. It's just one of the aspects. But being a good composer, start there. Learn your craft. Get better at it. Leverage what you know in other musical fields, whether you're a singer-songwriter, game composer, or guitarist, or maybe you play dulcimer or whatever. Leverage that and learn about the industry, which brings me up to number 2. It takes an unrelenting curiosity. An unrelenting curiosity. Because the most successful composers that I know are lifelong learners. They are always learning. They're learning new techniques. They're learning about new trends because trends shift and trends change. If you just do the same thing over and over and over again, I mean, ultimately there's a shelf life on what you are really currently good at. I mean, certain types of cues and styles are a little bit more evergreen than others, but even still, trends shift and change. And so you have to be a lifelong learner. And it takes an unrelenting curiosity. I mentioned trends, but also software and techniques. We're all keenly aware right now of the role that AI is playing in the industry and the shakeup it's having. Just this morning, I was reading about Adobe Podcasts, which is an AI-generated podcast cleanup tool, which, quite frankly, does passably what I currently charge other podcast clients and podcast hosts to do. I mean, it's not perfect, just like any AI. It's, robot overlords cleaning up audio. But as far as like noise reduction and cleaning up like mouth clicks and removing ums and all that stuff, it's getting really, really close. It's getting good. And so I have to learn how, instead of like freaking out about that, I need to be curious about it so that possibly I can leverage that into my own career. Maybe I use Adobe Podcasts for my podcast clients and I do the work in half the time and give them a better quality. Or I can use the AI and spend the time that they're paying me for on even finer details that I don't have the time to really pour into. So it's not that I'm trying to do it quicker just so I can charge them the same amount of money for half the work. That's not really the idea. If you pay for a half an hour of studio time or an hour of studio time, I'm going to give you an hour of studio time. But now I'm spending that hour not on cleaning up ums, but on perfecting the mix or finessing these edits. Anyway, that's just an example. Just this morning, I was reading about Adobe Podcasts. But that's coming from a place of curiosity and always learning. If you don't have a Mac Pro Video account, or if you haven't like taken LinkedIn learning classes or something over at masterclass.com, then go do it. Invest in yourself a little bit. Learn new software. I'm also learning Adobe Premiere. This isn't an Adobe podcast, but I'm learning Premiere because I know I need to up my video production game. And my moto vlogs, if you notice like the spinning titles and all that stuff, that's Premiere and all the blur and color grading and color correction. My current software doesn't really do that really well, which is why I've invested so heavily in nice cameras and lenses and background lights and all of that stuff, because all of that is captured in camera, if you will. But I could do a lot more over in Adobe Premiere. Learning new plugins, talking to other people. This is something that, it's one of the real cornerstones of 52 Qs is learning, improving, getting better. And so on top of being a good composer, it also takes an unrelenting curiosity. You should be a lifelong learner. That's number 2. Number 3, it takes being trustworthy. It takes being trustworthy, meaning your yes means yes and your no means no. Be true to your word, hit your deadlines. That's currency in the industry. So if the library needs something and they give you a deadline, you got to hit that deadline. And that's something I really, really struggle with. And it's not because I'm just like, farting around and not taking care of business, but I overpromise. And I've talked about this before on the podcast, overpromising and underdelivering, because I want to deliver this whole album to you in a month. But when I look at everything I have going on, that's not the most realistic deadline. And the truth is that the library would be fine with whatever deadline I give them. So I'm the one driving the deadline. And so that means that I should say, okay, realistically, what can I do so that I can meet my deadlines? responding to emails, being easy to work with, be affable, be kind, be generous. I mean, don't be a doormat, but be generous with your time, generous with your skills, generous with your knowledge. And I believe that all of that comes back at you. Right? Whatever you put out into the universe, I believe comes back in kind. But the third take, on top of being a good composer, having unrelenting curiosity, is being trustworthy. Be true to your word. Number 4, it takes a thick skin. And I'm telling last week's Dave this thing. I've been thinking a lot. And a part of me feels like I owe 447 an apology. I feel like I leaned in pretty heavy into 447. I still stand by how I feel about it and my takeaway. I still feel that, but maybe I shouldn't have put 447 quite on blast. But 447, my apologies. I believe and I trust that you are I trust that you are putting yourself into the job, right? And so I trust that you're doing the job. What am I trying to say? I'm trying not to say you're doing the best you can. That's not what I'm saying. I'm like, you're calling it like you see it, and you saw it differently than I did. And so number 4, Dave, I'm telling myself, it takes a thick skin, because you have to have a certain emotional fortitude to being a library music composer. No, to being any creative. I've talked about this before. I don't know how actors do it, man. Actors, your life is rejection. Which means that as you are working on your career, as you're moving forward, you've got to take the ups and downs. There are going to be high moments and there are going to be low moments. Don't keep score of the highs and the lows. Try not to keep score, says the guy literally keeping score on my forwards and returns all year long. But that's anyway. But you have to. You have to have a stomach for this. And even though it's perfectly natural for a return or a rejection or complete silence to stick on you, you've got to work. And I'm telling me, I'm telling myself as much as I'm saying, any you statement, right? It's also a me statement, a Dave statement. You've got to work on letting that stuff roll off of you. It's the forget part of write, submit, forget, and repeat. Yeah, it takes a thick skin. It takes a thick skin. And once again, I'm telling myself that, because there's definitely a slump I go through whenever I get a rejection or a return, and I just have to kind of power through it. And I have to tell Shannon, I'm like, Shannon, I just so you know, everything's okay. I'm not quitting anything, but if I feel grumpy and sour right now, it's because I just got an email and there's a return or something didn't get forwarded, or I heard back from a library and they want a bunch of notes or they want a bunch of corrections and all of that stuff. And so I have to tell her on the front end, this is what's going on. I'm all right. There's nothing weird between us, but this is what I'm walking through. So number 4, it takes a thick skin. Number 5 of what I believe it takes to make it in the production music industry is it takes business savvy. Because this is a business. And I know of composers who do this, a little bit more like as a hobby, which is totally fine. But even, if we're talking money and somebody wants to give you money for something that you create essentially out of thin air, then, that's business. which goes a little bit back to the thick skin thing, right? Part of having a thick skin is understanding that this is business. And so when you get a return from a library or a bunch of notes about, the mix notes or this isn't right, just know that they're not gatekeeping something from you. Instead, they're trying to help your music get to the point to where everybody wins. And if they don't believe it is, then it's because it's not ready yet, in their opinion. And if they're the library owners, then they're the ones who get to make that call. But having business savvy, approaching things as a business, having an entrepreneurial spirit, which means understanding things like taxes, doing the homework on contracts. And while you don't have to be a lawyer, but if you're talking, royalties and cue sheets and ownership and copyrights and all of that, then you should know your way around a contract, which goes back a little bit to number 2, lifelong curiosity and unrelenting curiosity and lifelong learning. But knowing your way around contracts, not being completely ignorant of those things. And I think I said taxes, tax brackets, doing all of that. Man, do I need to get better at that. Networking chops, not being afraid to make the cold email, investing in going to something like the Production Music Conference and shaking hands. And I get it. It's not my favorite thing. I mean, I'm a pretty amicable person, kind of affable, but I'm still deep down inside, I'm that little shy band nerd, right? But the networking chops, the business side of things, knowing the difference between a Schedule A and a Schedule C for tax purposes. Should I be an LLC? Should I be a sole proprietorship? Should I bring people into my sphere, into my circle that can help me out? If you're lousy at taxes, then get a tax person. If you are feeling overwhelmed by metadata, then find someone who can help you with metadata. That's a business decision. Dan Martell, in his book, Buy Back Your Time, explains it this way. Get a listing of your profit, your net profit for composing. Then divide that by the number of hours that you put into generating that profit, and that will essentially give you your cost per hour to do that thing, to compose, or to run the business, as it were. Anything that comes at you, anything that gets put into your to-do bucket that you can have someone else do for less than the cost of your composing work that you have figured out for yourself, find someone to do that for you. Whether it's filling out metadata spreadsheets, or whether it's, making appointments, or whatever. And this is something that I talked about a while ago when I brought somebody on to help me with my metadata, because the hours I was spending doing that work, I could have somebody else do for me, and I can then put my energy to composing. Does that make sense? And it's not about finding somebody else to do it cheaper. It's just you're actively costing yourself more money by doing the thing that somebody else could be doing. You're losing money by doing that. And again, that's the buy back your time concept in Dan Martell's book. So it takes business savvy, just that mindset, and investing into things like cameras, into things like plugins, into things like education. But also, anytime you see a new instrument pop up in the background, the deal that I have, not just with myself, but also, Shannon, is I've got to make money with it. I don't buy an instrument or a plugin without the expectation that I can leverage that somehow into my work. Everything from a banjo ukulele to a jaw harp to the riff generation plugin. It's bought not out of impulse, but to help the business. So I approach it as a business. I consider myself an entrepreneur, not just with 52 Qs, but also with my life as a composer. And I think we need to have that. And it takes that kind of business savvy. So that's number 5. It takes business savvy. Number 6, it takes sustainable creativity. If you're working towards this, you know that with production music, it's not about writing one cue and it gets millions and millions of placements and then you're just rolling in it. We've talked about having to have a steady output and understanding that it takes time for those cues to percolate through the system and then for you to get, paid and royalties and cue sheets and all of that. But it takes sustainability. And if you don't know where your creativity comes from, then that could be terrifying. That could be absolutely show-stoppingly terrifying. This is where things like references and modeling and depositing into your creative bank account. This is why it's so important. So important. When we get into writing several of the same types of cues, it can be really easy to go I don't need to reference. I know what I'm doing there. I don't need to deposit into my muse. But even just as late as last week or the week before, I came up with a cue for a neutral tasking cue that was something I was super proud of. And I thought to myself, when I got done, I'm like, man, where did all of that come from? And it came out of my having listened to many, many neutral tasking cues, which are kind of an offshoot of tension music and all of that. And I know how to write neutral tasking cues. And my live streams, I pop open a DAW and get to writing. But this cue, there was something different about it. And it's no surprise that I had spent the better part of 2 weeks listening to playlists from like Warner Chappell or from Extreme Music. I had them in the car. I would go on my bike ride in the morning, house cleaning, taking the trash out, all that stuff. I'd have my AirPods in and I was listening to it, but not recreationally. I was listening to it actively. But even still, that was seeping into the groundwater that was my creative well. So it's no surprise. I don't know why I'm surprising myself now. Duh, this is how it works. You can't keep withdrawing from a bank account without depositing something. I believe that creativity is a finite yet replenishable resource. And I replenish my creativity by listening, by feeding my muse, by pouring into myself actively, passively, and that helps my sustainability. What doesn't help my sustainability is just opening up a blank DAW and throwing myself, into the keyboard and into the plugins and everything. That generally doesn't work out well. My best work comes after I have taken in, right? If I'm going to go on a bike ride or if I'm going to run a marathon, you're going to eat a breakfast before, I guess, I don't know, you have to eat some protein or something. You can't go run a marathon on a completely empty stomach. You've got to intake before you outtake. Now, if we want to carry that bank metaphor even further, right? If you deposit so much and you're listening, then sometimes you can live off the interest, right? But even still, even after 100 of the same type of cues, your account could benefit from a little shot, a little investment. And I think you'll find a little goes a long way because it's compounded interest. Is my banking metaphor falling apart? Maybe. But for me, that's what helps sustainable creativity. Because if you haven't worked that out, if you haven't figured out where your ideas can come from and how you can manufacture ideas, then, like I said, it's terrifying. It's slow going. It's frustrating. That is the realm of imposter syndrome. And that's quite frankly not how professionals do it. Professional composers making a living, a 20, 30, 40-year career, they don't make a 40-year career out of waiting for inspiration to strike. No composer I've ever heard about, read about, saw an interview, ever said, I had a 40-year career, just like John Williams just doesn't pop off and says, oh, whatever comes to mind. No, he works at it. It's work. And in order to do that, you have to figure out where that sustainability comes from. For me, it's referencing, it's listening, it's depositing into my creative banking account so that I can withdraw later. So that's number 6, sustainable creativity. So we had number 1, takes being a good composer. Number 2, it takes an unrelenting curiosity. Number 3, it takes being trustworthy. Number 4, it takes a thick skin. Number 5, it takes business savvy. Number 6, it takes sustainable creativity. Number 7, it takes discipline. This gig takes discipline. A 40-year career takes discipline, and this feeds into all of these other things. It takes discipline to sit down and do your taxes when you don't want to do your taxes. It takes discipline to not listen to the latest podcast. It takes discipline to not listen to, an audiobook or something, and instead do your reference work. It takes discipline to hit your deadlines. It takes self-discipline to not go off into tangents on YouTube. And before you know it, you've spent 2 hours researching Adobe Premiere plugins instead of doing the work. That may or may not have been autobiographical. But I can excuse it away, right? Because, I need to learn Premiere because I make videos. Again, I told you this is as much about me reminding myself as it is sharing with you. But it takes discipline. It takes discipline to wake up every day and do the thing. Set a schedule, and even more importantly, keep a schedule. I know that every Wednesday morning, I'm going to record this podcast. It's on my calendar. Before I do any of my Full Sail stuff, it's like, I get up at 4 o'clock, or the alarm goes off at 4 o'clock. By 4:30, I was on the bicycle this morning, did 7 miles. That's all discipline. I didn't want to do that. If I'm being honest, I didn't want to bike for 7 miles before 5 o'clock. But there it was. Now, I don't regret doing it. I very rarely regret doing all those things. But going to bed early, setting my calendar, adhering to my calendar, doing the things, stop doing the things I don't need to be doing, and that's all discipline, even when I don't want to do it. Because typically, on the other side of having done it, I feel really good about it. I'm glad I did. Like I said, I very rarely regret exercising. I very rarely regret notching things off of my to-do list. However, I've absolutely regretted not doing those things, 100%. And that just takes discipline. It takes discipline not to go off into a hole of researching plugins. The other day, I got into a rabbit hole of playing banjo. I don't have any cues right now. Well, that's not entirely true. I don't have many cues right now calling for banjo. And I'm like, this is fascinating. All this banjo technique. Another member of the 52 Cues community had turned me on to like claw banjo technique. I'm like, this is great. This is amazing. Yes. So I was just absorbing as much as I possibly could. And before I know it, it's like 4 hours later. And I had to like have the discipline to like, okay, I'm going to stick a pin in this. I'm going to circle back to it when I don't have all these other things I really, really should be doing. I'm glad I got turned on to like claw hammer technique for banjo. That's my kind. So for the ukulele banjo, it's really, really fun. Sounds great. Can't wait to learn more. But the discipline of setting that aside so that I do the thing I need to be doing. And that just takes discipline. That's number 7. And then finally, number 8. In order to make it in this industry, it takes patience. I've said it before. It takes patience. Patience with yourself, patience with the libraries, patience with the process, patience learning, patience pushing through, creative blocks. I think Shannon the other day called it like creative constipation during one of her check-ins on the community. It just takes patience. Patience with cue sheets, patience with getting paid, patience with getting placed, patience with hearing back from libraries, patience in dealing with returns from taxi or rejections from a library, patience with your learning style, patience in learning new skills. I know you want it to happen now. I want it to happen now. And I know that you're ready to get paid because you have bills due. I know some of you have been at this a really long time and are seeing precious few wins. I'm just encouraging you to have patience. Because I do believe, and I say this at the end of every podcast episode, that the universe has amazing plans for you. I believe that. It's not a platitude. I believe it. But sometimes that takes more patience than we want. So that's my final takeaway. It takes patience. But what about you? Your thoughts? Do you have anything not on the list? From it takes being a good composer, it takes an unrelenting curiosity, it takes being trustworthy, it takes having a thick skin, it takes business savvy, it takes sustainable creativity, it takes discipline, and it takes patience. Anything else? Anything that I missed? I would love to hear from you. Please let me know in the comments below. I do read all those comments and I make an effort to respond to them. So we're going to take a quick break and we are going to hear from Mrs. 52 Cues, Shannon Croft, who's going to tell you all about the community and how you can join up. But when we return, we're going to be checking out a dark and mysterious instrumental cue, which features some flute, written by 52 Cues community member Claudio D.
Hey y'all, I'm Shannon Croft, and I want to tell you that the 52 Cues podcast is made possible by viewers and listeners just like you, composers and producers who are looking for a better way to connect and collaborate. You see, 52 Cues isn't just another website selling static, pre-recorded videos to a mass audience. It's a fun, vibrant, and positive community that comes together online for sharing cues, getting feedback, and discussing what's up in the production music industry. You'll find both personalized feedback and live interaction, which are the best and fastest ways to grow your skills and earn more placements. The best part is that the 52 Cues community is absolutely free. And when you're ready to take your career to the next level, we offer friends and family subscriptions, which unlock weekly live streams, live interactive group feedback sessions, monthly interactive workshops, and more. Head over to 52cues.com and sign up today. And while you're there, Check out our personalized feedback videos, private lessons, and of course, merch. I can't wait to see you at 52cues.com.
All right, that was Night Owl by Claudio D. Thank you so much for sending this along. This was sent along during our week 9 feedback thread. And Claudio said, this week I've been working on Night Owl, which is a dark, mysterious, and calm instrumental cue featuring a Fuhara flute, piano, and dulcimer, perfect for night scenes and wildlife. And the track was already submitted and accepted by a label, going to be released on Warner Chappell. Well done. Congratulations. Huge congratulations on that. Warner Chappell, that's the big boys. That's the dance. So well done. So any feedback here is after the fact, but I just wanted to listen to it. I really enjoyed this. I you know me. I love me some flutes. And my question is this a MIDI flute? I feel like it is, and there were a couple of times when the flute was super exposed that it felt a little MIDI-y to me. I like everything about this, and it should be noted that this isn't mixed and mastered because the library is going to master it. I did boost it by about 4 dB, just so it's a little bit louder. But so I understand. I'm not going to give you a ton of mix notes or anything, so because that's going to be mixed and mastered. But the flute, dig all of this. The flute just feels a little, I don't know. There's a little uncanny valley. And a couple of the resonances here are popping out a little bit too much. I would probably just back it down just a little bit. And I'm not necessarily sure you need a big edit point here and a big edit point there. Again, it's already been accepted, so much of this is moot. But this is a really big edit point And I wonder if we could just tighten it up just a little bit. I like this because it's going into a bigger section. And so I would probably, if I were to tighten this up, I would probably do it more like this. A little bit like that. So it feels more like a fermata than a caesura. And I don't think you necessarily need that shaker coming on. Yeah, I almost would do like something like this. Let's see if we can't. This might sound terrible, but I'm trying to get that shaker out of there. Tweak it out just a little bit more in time, because this edit point at the end of this, I think, is super effective. I dig all of this. It just makes this whole, we take a little bit of a right turn here, and it makes this whole like 40 seconds worth of intro, or 45 seconds worth of intro, and then we really get into the meat. Love that piano sound. I think it's great. Fantastic piano melody, very patient piano melody. Like you could about start the cue right here at the top and have something around 2 minutes or so. But just a thought for you. And if that is a MIDI flute, then I wonder if like getting a Bansuri player or something like from Sound Better or something like that. And I'm not familiar with that Fujara flute. Would probably make the this edit point a little cleaner without the shaker. Yeah, I imagine an editor would trim that out. Again, it's already been accepted, so it might be somewhat moot. Some of the resonances are of that glockenspiel are popping out just a little bit here if I were to back it up. Yeah, you can see there's one little guy that pops out. Something to be mindful of there. I like the melody doubled. So overall, I mean, really dig it. Fantastic melody. Love the mood of this, and like I've said, this has already been accepted, and so congratulations on that. These are all minor things, and it's obviously something's working because Library picked it up. It's going to go off to Warner Chappell. So well done. Thank you so much for sending along, Night Owl. As I mentioned, this was sent during our week 9 weekly feedback thread. We do put weekly feedback threads every single week over at 52 Qs. We're currently in the middle of collecting for week 10, and I will be featuring one of the cues written during week 10. I will be featuring them next week, and so be sure to check out. And if that's something that you're interested in, then go over to 52qs.com and join the community. If you found that feedback helpful and you would like feedback on your own cues, this is a service that I offer. Head over to 52qs.com/coaching and to learn all about how you can order up your own feedback video where I provide feedback and talk about the music theory side of things, talk about the form, structure, title, mix, EQ, and all of that. So head over once again to 52qs.com/coaching. coaching. Now, while you're there, you can also check out my Zoom feedback or Zoom one-on-one sessions, and you can book a one-on-one coaching session, or you could check out our mastermind, which starts up here in just a few weeks. The first week of April starts up the spring mastermind. So that is going to do it for me. You don't want to miss next week, where I am going to talk about and give you my Mount Rushmore of plugins. Now, if you're not from the US, Mount Rushmore is a monument that features 4 very prominent US presidents, right? So my Mount Rushmore, these would be the plugins that I just can't quit. I can't live without these. So what are my Mount Rushmore of plugins? Be sure to tune in next week to find out. Once again, a huge word of thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52Qs. Thank you so much for all of your support. Really love and appreciate you. But that's going to do it for me this week. I hope that your week 9 went great, and I hope that you're having a fantastic week 10. And remember, everybody, that I know and trust and believe and have confidence that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next time, peace. The 52Qs podcast is copyright 2023 818 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community and submitting your cue for consideration on the podcast, head over to 52qs.com.